The rope around her wrist wasn't the worst part. It was the way they looked at her, like she was livestock at market, something to be appraised and owned. Ayanna stood in the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, Montana, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon where the mountains met an endless sky that seemed to mock her captivity. The year was 1873, and freedom felt as distant as those peaks. "Step forward, girl," barked Marshal Thompson, his weathered hand gripping the other end of the rope. The townspeople gathered in clusters, their whispers cutting through the morning air like winter wind. Some pointed, others shook their heads in disgust. A few children stared with wide eyes before their mothers pulled them away, as if Ayanna's very presence might contaminate their innocence. She had been walking this same route for 3 weeks now, from the jail to the general store, from the store to the boarding house where she scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots, always with the rope, always with the stairs. The sign hanging around her neck read, "Property of Copper Ridge Township," in crude black letters that seemed to burn against her chest. "Move along now," Thompson grunted, tugging the rope when she paused to watch a hawk circling overhead. That bird could go anywhere, be anything. She envied its wings more than she had ever envied anything in her 22 years of life. The general store's bell chimed as they entered, and conversation died like a candle snuffed out. Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, looked up from her ledger with pursed lips and disapproving eyes. "She's to stock the back shelves today," she announced to no one in particular. "Keep that rope short, Marshal. I won't have her thinking she can wander." Ayanna began her work in silence, stacking canned goods and arranging bolts of fabric while the rope chafed against her wrist. She had learned not to speak unless spoken to, not to look directly at the white faces that surrounded her daily routine. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, speaking of a time when their people moved freely across these lands, when respect was earned through character rather than demanded through chains. The store door opened with its familiar chime, and boots crossed the wooden floor with a different rhythm than the usual hurried steps of townsfolk. These were deliberate, confident, unhurried. Ayanna glanced up briefly and saw a tall man in a worn leather jacket, his hat pulled low, but not low enough to hide eyes the color of storm clouds. He moved through the store like he belonged there, like he belonged anywhere he chose to be. "Afternoon, Mrs. Henderson." His voice carried the rough warmth of someone who spent his days under open sky. "I need supplies for the ranch. Wire, nails, and coffee if you've got it fresh." "Of course, Mr. Sullivan. Right away." Mrs. Henderson's tone shifted to something approaching respect, a sound Ayanna hadn't heard directed toward anyone in her presence. For months, as the man conducted his business, Ayanna felt his gaze settle on her more than once. Not the invasive stare she had grown accustomed to, but something different, something that made her straighten her shoulders despite the weight of her circumstances. When their eyes met for just a moment, she saw something she had almost forgotten. Existed in this place recognition of her humanity. The transaction completed, he turned to leave, but paused near where she worked. The words he spoke were quiet, meant for her ears alone, but they rang in her heart like thunder across the plains. "You don't belong to anyone." Then he was gone, leaving only the scent of leather and sage, and the first spark of hope Ayanna had felt since the day they put that rope around her wrist. Those 4 words haunted Ayanna through the sleepless nights that followed. "You don't belong to anyone." She repeated them silently as she swept the boarding house floors, as she endured the daily parade through town, as she lay on the thin mattress in the storage room that served as her quarters. The rancher's voice had carried something she hadn't heard in months: certainty. Not pity, not sympathy, but absolute conviction. 3 days after their encounter, she saw him again. This time he was talking with Mayor Whitfield outside the bank, their conversation animated but too distant for her to hear. Marshal Thompson yanked the rope impatiently when he noticed her attention wandering. "Eyes forward, girl. You're not here to gawk at your betters." But something had shifted in the way she carried herself. Her spine remained straight despite the rope, Her gaze no longer automatically dropped when townspeople stared. Mrs. Henderson noticed first. "That one's getting ideas above her station," she complained to her husband, loud enough for half the store to hear. "Mark my words, trouble's coming." The trouble began small. When Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, made her usual comment about keeping the savage in line, Ayanna turned and looked directly at her. No words, no gestures, just steady, unwavering eye contact that said more than any speech. Mrs. Patterson flustered, dropping her shopping list and hurrying from the store. "What's gotten into you?" Marshal Thompson demanded that evening as they walked back to the boarding house. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded Ayanna of her grandmother's favorite beadwork. "You're acting different. Uppity." "I'm acting like a person," she replied quietly. The first time. She had spoken unprompted in weeks. Thompson's hand went to his belt, where a leather strap hung alongside his keys. "Maybe you need reminding of your place." But before he could raise his hand, a familiar voice cut through the evening air. "Evening, Marshal, Miss." Sullivan emerged from the shadows cast by the mercantile building, his presence immediately changing. The dynamic of the moment. Thompson's hand fell to his side, though his jaw remained clenched with frustration. "Mr. Sullivan," Thompson nodded curtly, "just escorting the prisoner back to quarters." "Prisoner?" Sullivan's storm-gray eyes moved from Thompson to Ayanna, then to the rope binding her wrist. What crime was she convicted of? The question hung in the air, like smoke from a campfire. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. Everyone in town knew the answer, but no one had spoken it aloud in weeks. Ayanna had been found near the site of a robbery, the only evidence being her presence and the color of her skin. No trial, no jury, just the assumption of guilt that had become her chains. "She was found near the scene of a crime," Thompson said finally. "Evidence suggests..." "What evidence?" Sullivan's voice remained calm, but something dangerous glinted in his eyes. "Because I haven't heard of any evidence. I've heard plenty of assumptions." Ayanna watched this exchange with growing amazement. No one had questioned her treatment since the day they bound her. No one had demanded answers or challenged the system that had reduced her to property. Yet here stood this rancher, asking the questions she had given up hope anyone would ever ask. "The town council made its decision," Thompson said, his voice rising slightly. "She'll work off her debt to society until we see fit to release her." "Debt for what crime?" Sullivan pressed. "And what judge decided the length of her sentence?" The marshal's face reddened. "Mr. Sullivan, I don't appreciate you questioning the authority of this town's law enforcement, and I don't appreciate seeing someone treated like livestock without a due process." Sullivan stepped closer, and though he wasn't a particularly large man, something in his presence made Thompson take a step back. "This is still America, Marshal. Even out here." Ayanna felt something stir in her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten. Hope mixed with something fiercer, something that tasted like the freedom her grandmother used to describe in stories of the old days. She watched Sullivan face down the marshal with quiet courage, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. "This conversation isn't over," Thompson muttered, tugging roughly on the rope. "Come on, girl. People are watching." As they walked away, Ayanna turned back once to see Sullivan still standing there, his silhouette dark against the last light of sunset. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture so small and respectful that tears stung her eyes. Tomorrow would bring more of the same rope, more stares, more cruelty, but something fundamental had changed. Someone had seen her as human. Someone had spoken for her when she couldn't speak for herself. And in that moment, she began to remember who she had been before they tried to take her identity away. The seeds of defiance, once planted, have a way of growing in even the harshest soil. Word spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire in dry grass. By morning, half the town knew about Sullivan's confrontation with Marshal Thompson, and opinions split like wood under an axe. Some whispered that it was about time someone questioned the treatment of the native woman. Others muttered darkly about outsiders interfering with local justice and the dangerous precedent of challenging established order. Ayana felt the shift immediately. The boarding house owner, Mr. Kellerman, avoided eye contact when he brought her morning chores. Mrs. Henderson watched her with newfound wariness, as if she might suddenly sprout claws. Even the children, who usually pointed and giggled, now kept their distance, sensing the adult tension that hung over the town like storm clouds. But the most dangerous change was in Marshal Thompson himself. His grip on the rope had tightened. His commands grew sharper, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of a man whose authority had been questioned in public. That kind of humiliation demanded response. It came on Thursday morning. "Change of plans today," Thompson announced as he fastened the rope around her wrist with unnecessary force. "The town council wants to see you." Ayana's stomach clenched. The town council met only for serious business, and she had never been summoned before. As they walked through the streets, she noticed more people than usual lingering on porches and outside shops, their faces a mixture of curiosity and something darker. The council met in the back room of Patterson's bank, 5 men seated behind, a wooden table that had seen better days. Mayor Whitfield sat in the center, his round face serious beneath thinning hair. To his right sat Banker Patterson, his wire-rimmed spectacles reflecting the lamplight. The others she knew by sight, but not by name. All of them merchants or landowners who had never looked at her as anything more than a problem to be managed. "Sit," Mayor Whitfield commanded, gesturing to a single chair placed several feet from the table. Thompson positioned himself behind her, the rope still connecting them like a physical reminder of her status. "We've received complaints," the mayor began without preamble, "about your behavior, about your attitude. It seems you've forgotten your place." Ayana kept her eyes fixed on a point just over the mayor's shoulder, a technique her grandmother had taught her for dealing with difficult situations. "Stay present, but don't give them the satisfaction of seeing your fear," the old woman had said. "They can chain your body, but your spirit belongs to you alone." Marshal Thompson reports that you've become defiant, disrespectful, that you're speaking when not spoken to and making eye contact with your betters. The mayor's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "This stops now." "We've been generous," added Banker Patterson, removing his spectacles to clean them with deliberate precision. "We could have handed you over to the territorial authorities. Instead, we've given you a chance to work off your debt to this community. But generosity requires gratitude." The third council member, a man with silver whiskers and tobacco-stained teeth, leaned forward. "There's talk that someone's been filling your head with ideas about rights and equality. But you need to understand something, girl. Rights are earned, not given, and you haven't earned anything." Ayana felt the familiar burn of injustice in her throat. These men spoke of generosity and debt, as if she had asked for their charity, as if being suspected of a crime she didn't commit was somehow a kindness they had bestowed upon her. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Mayor Whitfield demanded. For weeks she had remained silent. For weeks she had swallowed her words and accepted their version of justice. But Sullivan's voice echoed in her memory. "You don't belong to anyone." And suddenly, the silence felt more like betrayal than safety. "I have done nothing wrong," she said quietly. The room erupted. Thompson yanked the rope hard enough to bruise her wrist. The council members exchanged glances that spoke of vindication and rising anger. "Nothing wrong." Patterson's voice climbed an octave. "You were found at the scene of a robbery. I was traveling through when I heard gunshots. I went to help and found Mr. Morrison already dead. That is not a crime. You expect us to believe that?" The silver-whiskered man laughed harshly. "A savage just happening to be in the area when a white man gets killed." The word savage hit her like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch. "I expect you to believe the truth." "The truth," Mayor Whitfield said slowly, "is what this council decides it is, and we've decided that your attitude adjustment period is over. Marshal Thompson, double her work assignments And if there are any more reports of disrespect or defiance, we'll discuss more permanent solutions. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Ayana understood perfectly. They were telling her that her life balanced on the edge of their patience, and that patience was wearing thin. As Thompson led her from the room, she heard Mayor Whitfield call after them. "Anne Marshall, keep that rope shorter, much shorter." Outside, the morning sun felt different on her face, as if the council's threats had somehow dimmed its warmth. But as they passed the general store, she saw Sullivan loading supplies into his wagon. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw something there that the council's threats couldn't touch. He had heard her speak her truth. In the room full of men who refused to listen, someone had heard her voice. That had to count for something. The shortened rope made everything harder. Ayana could barely extend her arm to reach the high shelves, could barely walk without feeling the constant tug against her wrist. Thompson seemed to take pleasure in the restriction, jerking the rope whenever she moved too freely. But something had fundamentally changed within her. The council's threats had backfired, igniting a fire they couldn't extinguish. On Friday evening, as the autumn wind carried the scent of coming winter through the streets of Copper Ridge, everything came to a head. She was scrubbing the boarding house steps when she heard the commotion from the main street. Raised voices, the sound of horses, someone shouting orders. Through the gathering dusk, she could make out a crowd forming near the general store. "Stay put," Thompson ordered, but his attention was clearly drawn to whatever was happening. He secured her rope to the porch railing and moved toward the disturbance, drawn by the magnetic pull of potential conflict. From her position on the steps, Ayana could see Sullivan's wagon parked outside the store, but something was wrong. The crowd wasn't just curious townspeople. These were men with purpose, men with anger, and at their center stood Mayor Whitfield with a document in his hand. "Daniel Sullivan," the mayor's voice carried across the evening air. "By order of the town council, you are hereby banned from conducting business within the limits of Copper Ridge. Your interference with local justice makes you unwelcome here." Sullivan emerged from the store, his face calm, but his eyes blazing. "And what law gives you the authority to ban a citizen from a public town?" "We won't have outsiders stirring up trouble, filling people's heads with dangerous ideas about equality and rights," called out Banker Patterson. "Dangerous ideas?" Sullivan's voice carried controlled fury. "Like the idea that every person deserves a fair trial, that guilt requires evidence, not just suspicion?" "You've said enough." Marshal Thompson pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his gun. "Mount up and ride out, Sullivan." Ayana watched from the boarding house steps, her heart pounding as the confrontation escalated. This was her fault. Sullivan was being driven away because he had dared to speak for her, because he had seen her humanity when others saw only property. "I'm not leaving," Sullivan said quietly. "Not while an innocent woman is being held without trial, without evidence, without basic human dignity." "She's not innocent," Thompson snarled. "She's a savage who killed a white man. She's a human being who deserves justice, not vengeance." "Last warning, Sullivan." Thompson's gun cleared its holster. "Ride out or be carried out." Time slowed. Ayana saw Sullivan's hand move toward his own weapon, saw the crowd tense like a coiled spring, saw the moment when words would give way to violence. In that instant, she made a choice that would echo through the rest of her life. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. She had worked the rope free from the railing, and now she stood in the middle of the street. "Stop this madness. I turned to her, and for the first time in months, she felt truly seen. Not as property, not as a problem, but as a person with something to say that mattered. "You want to know what happened the day Morrison died?" Her voice carried across the silent street. "I was traveling to find my cousin in Helena. I heard gunshots and screams. When I reached the Morrison place, I found him dying in his doorway. His last words were, 'Tell them Frank Carson did this. Tell them Frank Carson killed me.'" The silence was deafening. Frank Carson had left town 2 days after Morrison's death, claiming business in California. Everyone knew it, but no one had. I questioned the convenient timing. Morrison lived long enough to give me a message for his wife, Ayana continued. He told me to tell her that the money is hidden under the loose floorboard in the kitchen, behind the stove. He was afraid Carson would come back for it. Mrs. Morrison stepped forward, her face pale. The money? How could you know about Henry's hiding place unless your husband told me before he died? Ayana finished gently. I stayed with him so he wouldn't die alone. That's why I was there when you found me. Not to rob him, but to honor a dying man's last request. The crowd began to murmur, the sound of certainty cracking like ice in spring. Mayor Whitfield looked between Ayana and Mrs. Morrison, his political instincts warring with the growing realization that they might have made a terrible mistake. This changes nothing, he said finally, but his voice had lost its authority. No, Sullivan said, stepping forward. She's not. From his coat, he produced a folded document. I sent for the territorial marshal 3 weeks ago. Frank Carson was arrested in Sacramento yesterday, and he's confessed to the robbery and murder. This is an official order for the immediate release of Ayana Crow Feather. The name hit her like a physical shock. She hadn't heard her real name spoken aloud in months. Not girl or savage or prisoner, but her name. The name her grandmother had given her. Marshal Thompson's face went white. You had no right to go over my head. I had every right to seek justice when local law enforcement failed to provide it, Sullivan replied. Now, Marshal Thompson, remove those restraints immediately. With shaking hands, Thompson untied the rope from her wrist. The hemp fell to the dusty street like a dead snake, and Ayana felt the absence of its weight like the return of flight to a caged bird. Miss Crow Feather, Sullivan said formally, you're free to go wherever you choose. She looked at him, this man who had seen her humanity when others saw only prejudice, who had risked his safety and reputation to fight for her freedom. Where I choose, anywhere in this wide country, you belong to no one but yourself. I choose, she said clearly, to go home. She turned to Sullivan, who was watching her with something that might have been pride. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing me when others chose blindness, for speaking when others chose silence. As she walked away from Copper Ridge for the last time, the mountains seemed to welcome her back, their peaks catching the last light of day like a promise of tomorrow. She was free, not because others had granted her freedom, but because she had never truly lost it. They had bound her body, but her spirit had remained unbroken, and in the end, that had made all the difference. What an incredible journey this has been. Ayana's story of dignity, resilience, and ultimate triumph shows us that the human spirit cannot be broken by prejudice or injustice. Her courage to speak truth to power, combined with Sullivan's moral bravery, created a powerful testament to the importance of standing up for what's right. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Stories like this need to be told and shared. Your subscription helps us continue bringing you powerful, untold stories from history that inspire and educate. What did you think of Ayana's transformation from victim to victor? Was Sullivan's intervention realistic for that time period? And what modern parallels do you see in this historical tale? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives. Don't forget to check out our other historical stories in the playlist. Next week, we're diving into another incredible tale of courage against impossible odds. You won't want to miss it. Like this video, if Ayana's story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of dignity and resilience. And remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and you belong to no one but yourself. See you in the next video where history comes alive.